Located on the banks of the Coosa River in northeast Alabama, Childersburg is a town with an interesting past. Cars speed by on busy Highway 280 just a couple of blocks from downtown, but Main Street Childersburg is usually pretty quiet. Downtown merchants pass the time between customers by playing music or spreading gossip with the occasional passerby. Only 5,000 people live here now, but the older folks can remember a time when Childersburg's population exploded from 500 to 15,000 in just a few months. Back then, Childersburg supplied the ammunition that helped win World War II. It all started as tensions grew around the world.
Both the Depression and the isolationist spirit that pretty much dominated American politics in the 1920s and 30s had led to a significant deterioration of American military posture. And Roosevelt and some congressmen, but by no means all, were very much alarmed by the weakness of America's military strength in the late 30s and early 40s. And Roosevelt began twisting arms.
The President of the United States established a program to make the United States the arsenal of democracy. And a number of ordnance facilities sprang up across the country. Now, this was prior to Pearl Harbor. We were producing ordnance material, not necessarily for ourselves, but for our allies.
You know, the world situation was pretty bad about that time. The reason we were preparing, we knew that we were going to be in war. We didn't know the Japanese were going to bomb Pearl Harbor, but Hitler, he had almost invaded all of Europe.
In the late 1930s, the U.S. government started buying farmland along the Coosa River in Childersburg. None of the local people knew what the government had in mind.
Childersburg was just a small, sleepy little town of 500 people in 1940. The population over the last 20 years, from 1920 to 1940, the population had grown by 100, from 400 to 500.
We had 3 gins at one time, cotton gins running in Childersburg, which made it a big town. We had our big cotton warehouses and all that. But that was the main income that we had.
It was a quiet town. Now in spring, at cotton and corn planting time, it got a little busy. In the fall, at harvest time, it got a little busy. But other than that, it was pretty quiet, just like most any small town would be that didn't have any industry.
Because it was primarily a cotton farming country at that particular time, and we had the first electric gin in the state of Alabama in Childersburg. But boy, when the ammunition plant first came here, this thing changed in a hurry.
In January of 1941, the government announced plans to build a $100 million ammunition plant in Childersburg. Thousands of people from around the country flocked here to get jobs.
Well, yeah, I think they had a little old radio then. They was telling about people, they needed people to work. They was calling from all over.
The construction provided employment for some, I believe, 25 companies, 25 to 50 subcontractors, and ultimately the plant employed 25,000 employees.
Well, that was all the talk in Silicaga. Everybody talked about it. And most of the people were coming to work here. And beside that, we were being flooded with people from other parts of the country coming in to get houses and things to live in.
Yeah, the change in Childersburg was probably the most dramatic of any community in Alabama. By the summer of 1941, there were 9,000 people living in Childersburg, which had gone from a town with no stoplights and no paved roads and 2 policemen into a really booming and greatly overcrowded environment.
I would say that in the first year to 18 months, there was at least 18 to 20,000 people came into Childersburg area. Now, a large majority of those had to drive straight through town on unpaved streets.
It happened so fast. It happened almost overnight. And, you know, just went from nothing to crowded out.
The first thing, we had a flux of people to come in and open up cafes and feed places because they knew what was going to happen. And then people began to build bungalows and everything else for people to stay and open up trailer parks. We had trailer parks everywhere. And from a town of 500 people, I think the population was actually 504 at that time. And it didn't take it long to build up to about 12,000 to 15,000 living in Childersburg.
But we had to make accommodations for all these people. People were changing chicken houses, barns, into places where people could sleep. We had a 1-car garage that my uncle used. We didn't have a car. And we sealed it and put cots in there so men could have a place to sleep. That's all they wanted. They could get their little crackers and cheese at the store and a place to sleep. They were so desperate for work.
And people were living in everything. People was turning their bedrooms into bedrooms, as much as 4 beds in 1 bedroom. Down where I remember a lady down the country did that.
I was a country boy. And to think of thousands of people coming in here was just unbelievable. And I know of people that even slept in coal houses where people kept coal, slept in those things. And if you had a bed, you could rent all the beds that you wanted. In fact, we even had one boy that came out in the country and boarded with us, which was a big asset to our family, just to have an extra boarder in the house.
And some 250 apartment buildings were constructed in Childersburg, and an equal number of apartments built in Sylacauga and Talladega, also for workers.
Laborers made 50 cents an hour, but they got to work most all the time that one wanted to, 6, 7 days a week, because it was urgent to get the plant built.
And so the government could get its ammunition plant built and provide for economic relief for the population of East Alabama. You're going to employ 25,000 people at Childersburg, 7,000 or 8,000 at Anniston Army Depot, several thousand more at the Brecken facility at Talladega, which was the powder bagging plant. So these jobs meant a lot to these people.
Construction of the ammunition plant began immediately on 13,500 acres of land that the government had purchased from local farmers.
This plant seemed to spring like mushrooms in what they call the old cornfield at Childersburg. And where they had been raising corn, now they were making munitions.
What was happening at the plants, one would go into operation as another one was being built. It was a massive complex of munition plants, or things that dealt with munitions.
The government owned the land. They bought the land. The government built the plant, but they lacked the personnel and the expertise to run them. And so they hired civilian contractors to run them. And DuPont de Nemours was the contractor here.
Well, the nitrocellulose plant had 3 lines. They made rifle powder and artillery powder. Now, plant 2 was a TNT plant, trinitrotoluene, and that was for other explosives. And of course, they had to have the nitric acid plant that supplied the nitric acid for nitrocellulose, and then the sulfuric acid plant, it was to supply the acid for the TNT.
It was called the Alabama Ordnance Works, and it was the largest ammunition plant of its time, feeding tons of rifle and cannon powder to Allies fighting in Europe.
At the plant at Alabama Ordnance and making smokeless powder, we had the best production at the least expense of any of the 5 plants that they had in the United States. They operated more efficiently there than anywhere else.
1/3 of the production of the Childersburg facility went to the Russian or the Soviet Union's Red Army. And the ammunition was sent from Childersburg by rail and by truck to Anniston, where there were 2 Russian officers assigned duty at the Anniston Army Depot. And they made sure that the lettering was correct on the crates. Not a lot of people in Alabama knew how to do Cyrillic.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan.
When Pearl Harbor was bombed and the United States entered World War II, security at the plant became even more important than before.
At that time, I didn't have a radio, and there were 6 of us riding in a car. The old fella got in that morning, he had a little radio, and he said, "Boys, we're in World War II, so Japs bombed Pearl Harbor yesterday." That's a Monday morning. And so we come on to across the river on that little narrow bridge they had over there then, and there sat a bunch of Army men with their rifles. Railroad could be seen from the highway, and there was Army men up there. Got on out on towards Plant Road out there. There'd be one station here and there, and another one up there. 2 sitting down there at a little dugout in the parking area. Got a machine gun sitting up there. Just inside, if you clocked in, got in there, well, there's a machine gun sitting there. And the guard told us to talk to them, speak to them men, but don't stop and talk to them. So go on to your job. And he said there's an aircraft gun sitting up there on the top of the powerhouse. They had it up, big enough to set something on top of it.
Anytime that you went to town, you would hear the thing, well, we'll never live to see this thing happen because the Japs is going to be hitting us, or somebody's going to be coming in and bomb this whole place to tidbits. Yes, there was a lot of that talk and a lot of people that felt that way about it, but it never happened.
I would say people were much more patriotic or concerned about it than they are now. So we had everybody knew that they were going to have to go to war. If they were physically able, they had to go, they had to leave their families, and it wasn't just the young men, it was up to 38 or 40 years, even with children.
As men were drafted to serve in the military, women stepped forward to take their places at the plant. The jobs were dangerous.
Approximately 1/3 of Alabama's draft age male population went into service. They wore uniforms and went into service. which meant that there were very severe labor shortages throughout the state, and efforts were made to encourage women in particular to take on industrial jobs that had previously been held by men, or perhaps not been held by anybody at all in the state of Alabama.
Wasn't no men here. All the men had gone off to the Army. The women had taken over. My girlfriend and I decided one time that we'd join the WAC. Well, we got to thinking about it, and we rode the bus to Birmingham to talk to them about it. But we got up there and got chicken. We just chickened out on it. And I said, well, I got 2 brothers off, but I guess I'd stay here and cut powder, and that would be my way of winning the war. Yeah, I was afraid a lot of days when we went into work. We didn't know what would happen. We had an explosion over behind us one time.
The safety people would come out there and hold little demonstrations. And they'd just take anything, little piece of orange peel, throw it in that dipper and it'd explode. Just the least little thing that set it off.
Well, I was scared to death because, you know, the least little thing could have caused a spark and we'd gone up in smoke. And that was what they cautioned you about when they trained you to run your machine, to not let it pack up. See, they would stop up if you didn't keep an eye on your stuff.
The worst explosion that I recall, and I wasn't in there, I did hear that I was here in the bed working swing shift, midnights, and it was in the daytime, and that was after they put the women in the blending towers. That was the last part of it back there on the back. It blowed up. And what it was 3 stories high, and they had a chute at each window. You could go out, had a sand pile out yonder for you to land in to save you when you hit the ground, but they didn't hit the ground. They burned up before they got to the ground. I may be wrong on the number, but I was still thinking there were 7 women burned up.
As the war progressed, a 5th plant sprang up at the Alabama Ordnance Works in Childersburg. Its purpose was top secret, but rumors spread about what they were doing there.
It said, zip your lip. When you leave here, leave it here. Well, that's what we did. That didn't mean that we couldn't describe our job a little bit or something. We couldn't tell how dangerous it was. We couldn't tell anything about that, because you'd start a circulation out here amongst the people, and you'd have a big story going, you know.
The 5th plant that nobody knew anything about because it was highly classified was a part of the Manhattan Project, the P9 project.
This little plant was built on later years in there. And what it was, they tell me, and the rumor got out, and they run 1 gallon a day of liquid.
And they produced heavy water for the production of plutonium and uranium.
They said that went in the atomic bomb now. I don't know, have no proof about that. That was our rumor.
DuPont de Nemours was the contractor here. They were also the prime contractor for the Manhattan Project.
That was another one of the things that we didn't hear much about, although maybe was messing with some of it.
So it was only logical that they would use this facility to produce heavy water, which they could then ship to Oak Ridge, Tennessee.
And one of my brothers, they got his security and everything checked, and he was one that had permission to go in and pick up things in and around the Manhattan Project. But I never knew, and I don't know of anybody that ever knew but 2 people from Childersburg that worked there. So that was, and my brother's wife did not know that he had that security until about 4 years ago. She didn't even know that he ever had permission to go, because that was how secretive that was.
Soon after the atomic bomb blast in Japan, World War II came to an end and the Alabama Ordnance Works ceased production.
Some of the safety people came out there and called us together. Didn't shut down no job, they just got us in groups going in or out, changing shifts. And they told us that it's fixing to be ended, as after the atomic bomb and all, you know. And they said it's fixing to be ended. We're definitely not going to have any demonstrations. We're not going to have no celebrations. We're going to go on just like you're going home at the end of your shift. So they didn't want to turn into no demonstrations whatsoever, because we was working with powder, steel powder there. We didn't want to blow nothing up.
All communities that had defense plants were concerned about the post-war era and what could be done to sustain some of the growth that had occurred during the wartime. And in Childersburg, the Chamber of Commerce apparently was involved in studying ways to use the facilities of the Childersburg powder plant after the war.
Went to laying off, and people was gone just about like they went in there, just about as fast as they could come in there, they went out. It was over.
They just started moving out, and it got pretty haunted because everybody was leaving.
And Childersburg was just not as successful as Huntsville in finding a use for their arsenals. I mean, the Redstone Arsenal in Huntsville, when it was decided to move much of the rocket facilities and to create NASA there, that would of course provide a much more lasting and significant boost to that community because of the technology that was introduced into that industry in Huntsville, as opposed to the more low-tech uses that were used in the Childersburg plant.
The military came in and the contractors came in and they pumped all kinds of money into the economy. But when the war was over, all you had left was an abandoned facility, which we now know was heavily contaminated with nitrates, so that it can no longer be used. These things happen. The military is not particularly a good steward of the land because of the nature of the work they do. They must practice, they must train, and the more realistic they can make the training, the better chances are for survival for the men and success for the mission.
Some uncontaminated portions of the Alabama Ordnance Works were sold to businesses after the war. First a paper mill came, then a rayon plant that operated for over 20 years before it closed. The paper mill is still here and is the major employer in Childersburg. The ammunition plant stayed in various stages of readiness until the end of the Vietnam War, when the government started cleaning up toxic materials. Some of the land is still closed to the public, but the government gave over 2,000 acres to the city of Childersburg for an industrial park. Folks here hope this will make Childersburg a boomtown again.
We have just got given to the city of Childersburg 2,200 acres of land that we're going to use for an industrial park. And in this industrial park, we have got gas, we've got water, we've got rail transportation, we've got roads that are already built. All we've got to do is to rework them, but they got the base in there already laid out. They got the fire hydrants in, all of that. And if you think that's not a big break for any town, anywhere, 2,200 acres is a big industrial park, and we're proud of that.